I lost everything in the battle. My heart filled with despair. Just as I was about to give up, a warm voice whispered in my ear. You can't leave like this. It was my protector, her presence reigniting my hope. Chapter 29 Aiden. My all-pack house stood menacingly in front of me. The familiar grey walls of the prison that held me most of my life continued to glare down on me, silently telling me to move on and kill something else. I only wanted Aiden's blood. So with a crazed smirk on my face, my tail shaking in happiness and my ears twitching in an unknown ease, I slowly walked into the pack house, an unmissable skip in my step, walking down the familiar halls. My hands held behind me back as I looked at the walls and floors of this all-too-familiar place. I felt this feeling of peace at the thought of finally destroying this man's horrible reign. I bounded up the stairs, my feet barely stopping as they ran quickly up the staircase that was placed at the front of the house. This place had 3 levels, and the alpha, beta and gamma level was located at the top floor. I could hear Aiden's fast heart even before I took the next set of stairs leading to the 3rd floor, and my smile grew broader. His breaths came out scratchy and quick as he body controlled the impending heart attack that he would most likely have. The fat bastard. The 3rd level was a long and narrow hall filled with 3 different doors, each one containing one of the ranked family's rooms. 2 doors were placed on the left, the gamma and beta dorms inside. They looked almost identical, and I didn't need to look inside to know that, since I was the main cleaner for this level. Then the singular door placed in the center of the left side of the hall held the alpha's dorm, which I knew all too well. That's where I heard the heart beat the most. I ran to the door, threw open the door in haste. "Honey, I'm home," I screeched in a high-pitched voice. I could hear the heartbeat take a leap, from most likely Aiden having not heard my voice in years. I didn't pay attention to the tales of his home and immediately threw open his office, everything the same as I pictured it. The chair was turned around to face the window, and then my sensors locked onto my target. "Not even gonna turn around for me, babe?" I asked, in a sickly sweet voice that I knew he loved when his whores spoke to him like that when they came around. He didn't move. Instead, the door behind me slammed, and Aiden jumped me from behind, successfully knocking me to the ground. I grunted as we both hit the floor, his fattest body laying on top of me as if I was his favorite sofa. "You're late," he whispered to me as he struggled to restrain my arms. "I'm right on time." I yelled back and used my elbow to at least hit him somewhere in his ugly face. His grunt and low growl told me I had hit my target as I used this chance to throw his large body off of me. He quickly rolled away as I jumped to my feet, successfully pulling the daggers out as on my waist. I stood in a relaxed stance as I watched his ugly corpse climb to his feet slowly, his weight making it severely difficult to do so. I honestly chuckled at the sight. "Shut your trap, you dumb bitch," he told me as he used one hand to point an accusing finger at me while his other hand went to hold his most likely broken nose. Seeing Aiden brought a newfound rage in me that I had buried deep inside me long ago. My red eye burned intensely, the fiery feeling starting to take over the normal feeling of my grey eye. I held my daggers firmly in my hands as my tail twitched in my unfounded rage that I felt towards this man. Aiden soon stood to his full height, the disgustingness and ugliness that he possessed. It was a curse from Satan all in itself, making his personality and reason to always be mad at everyone and everything seem reasonable due to his looks, which consisted of the almost balding head with a couple of loose grey hairs, the dark brown eyes that always seemed to go black as they filled with lust and hatred every time he saw me, his pale and ugly skin which seemed to be breaking at the seams, and his ugly lips that looked so parched that it seemed painful. "The betas are dead," I told him firmly with a happiness in my tone. "A little too happily if you were talking about the people who have created you." I full-on began laughing. The feeling of my chest filling with air and releasing was exhilarating. "The whole fucking family is dead," I shouted, flailing my arms about wildly in a fit of rage and excitement. I continued to giggle softly to myself after. His whole body seemed to stop as he finally took into account that I had spoken. His hand drifted away from his nose, which had a slight trickle of red going down it. His eyes were slowly shifting to the blackness I had grown accustomed to. The things that once used to fill me with such fear now only made me smirk. "You killed them?" he asked, his voice actually cracking at the end of his words. I was in shock as I realized that this man that never seemed to show emotion to anyone finally did. He actually gave a fuck about those betas, and he's weak enough to show that he cared for them. I giggled in a sinister way, a plot forming in my head. Why, of course. I screeched, my eyes growing wider and my smile broader. The way their blood pooled on the ground in front of me made my whole body giddy. I continued to laugh and giggle like an awkward teenage girl that stood in front of her crush. I held my hands to my mouth and smiled like a maniac, continuing to stare at Aiden in front of me. Aiden continued to look at me with such rage and curiosity that I wasn't sure if he wanted to learn more about me or have my blood his off his carpet. He suddenly lurched forward, catching me off guard as I continued to think. His hands scrambled to grab the knife from either one of my hands, eventually taking the dagger from my left hand, and in a fast motion, he used the blade to plant the dagger kink in my hip, the crisp metal gliding across my bone in a painful manner. It forced me to cry out, the feeling unable to be just ignored and placed in the back of my mind. I bucked the fat man off me and stood to my feet. Only one of my daggers were still placed loosely in my right hand, while my other dagger was held firmly by Aiden standing in front of me, a sinister smile on his fat face. I winced quietly as my wound began to sting as the thick crimson liquid dripped down my body in a pool of dark red blood. I pressed my hand firmly against the large wound as the pain intensified around my body, the feeling pleasurable and painful all at the same time. I held one eye shut in pain, my teeth clenching and grinding together as the stinging and jabbing pain continued from my wound. I glanced up at Aiden to see him in a full-blown smirk. You'll never be able to defeat me. Aiden told me, a smirk at the end of his words. You'd always be that worthless bitch you first were when you were living here, he said, chuckling to me, his eyes cruel and lifeless. The only reason you ever grew more powerful was because of my training. He shouted loudly at me, and it made my ears twitch uncomfortably at the noise level. I growled softly at him, trying to look a little more intimidating, even though I knew I was at a large disadvantage from the stab wound Aiden gave me. I never even wanted to be powerful. I yelled at him, growling intimidating lie at him. Aiden looked down upon my slightly crouched form, his left eyebrow lifting in curiosity. You don't even deserve to be placed on this earth. I stared at the ugly fat bastard in front of me, his features even more prominent from before. I watched his now crazed eyes as he only continued to focus on me. The blood loss put me in a dazed feeling. I could feel my consciousness slowly slipping away from me. I growled louder than I did before, my mouth forming into a snarl, my ears being drawn back as I continued to growl. Then I'll take us both off it, I told him with a smirk at the end of my face. In my mind I thought of stabbing Aiden a trillion times, the picture in my mind almost as if it was really in front of me. Then out of nowhere, crystals popped out of the ground in a fast and insane manner all around, and as they continued to go through him and impale every inch of his body, as they continued to penetrate his flesh over and over. I did get a vampire ability, I thought kinda happily. I just had to lose my mind to get it. I smiled, looking at the scene in front of me. Aiden's body was so torn apart and bloody that you couldn't even make out which limbs belonged where and which bones belonged in those limbs. Without even thinking, one of my supposed crystals impaled my lower abdomen, raising my body off the ground. I looked as if I was one of those rag dolls, if they had been impaled by something and left vertically so the limbs hanged off around them, awkwardly around it, as its head tilted back. Looking down, I saw the dark red crystal twinkle in the light of the office, my blood slowly dripping down the sides and pooling over and around me, to which the crystal showed that its true color was a dark red and purple color. My favorite color, I whispered. I wondered as the voice repeated my name over and over. I looked around the room suspiciously and slowly, since every inch I turned made the pain intensify. No one was near me. What's happened, IG? I smiled at the voice, knowing exactly who it is. Hey, I replied quietly. What's happening to you? The words shocked me to no end, and I softly smiled at nothing. What I want. Then, using the last little bits of strength I had left in me, I chuckled. I began to cough soon after my laugh, my chin and neck looking like I had spilled red cordial on myself. The blood in my throat made it so I couldn't breathe properly, forcing me to give in to the darkness. Of a Chapter 30 aftermath, the fight was over. We were victorious. I'm not gonna sugarcoat it, the once clean mowed lawn they had behind the Moonrise Pack house was now a mess of blood. guts and dead bodies. I could even look in the tree line and see about 1 or 2 of our wolves quietly emptying their stomachs as the smell of thick blood rotting in the early morning sun made even the strongest of stomachs sick. During the battle, many warrior wolves did surrender. Probably having mates and children, they didn't want to die knowing that if they did, their other half would most likely kill themselves from depression since their other half was dead. It's impossible for a fully mated wolf to live without their other half. I even had to place a hand over my mouth to stop the contents of last night's dinner coming back and making an appearance. "Wigwood," I shouted through the pack-mind link, my voice loud enough and affirmative that I hoped I broke through a couple of walls that some of the wolves may have put up to keep me out. A series of yes beta came through the mind link, the amount of voices actually forcing me to hold my head slightly from a dull headache. Looking back out again at the bloody battlefield, I'm surprised that Ava hadn't contacted me yet, and it was honestly getting me worried. I did learn enough about that girl's past that I knew she had been screwed over one too many times. Then the result of being screwed so many times is that bloodthirsty craze. I had been there. I was a monster when my mate chose to fuck that human. It was like my heart was completely ripped out of my chest when I first found out, and I didn't know how to deal with the agony. What people don't realize is when something horrible or screwed up happens to someone that it screws with their mind so much people could change in an instant. Some people will turn into bloodthirsty killers. Others will harm themselves to get rid of the pain. Some may seek drugs for treatment, but in the end 50% of people will choose the so-called healthier path and get proper help. Then there's the other 50%. The 50% that choose the so-called life-ruining or cruel path. So I chose the more unhealthy path to deal with my emotions. I became a killer. I remember when I read this book while I was younger, about this girl who was a professional assassin. Cold, brutal, deadly. Since she was such a skilled fighter, she knew how to beat an opponent physically and mentally. There was about a whole chapter dedicated to the description of emotions. While fighting, she had done a whole study on the matter. It talked about how some people with their raging emotions can become the perfect fighters even if they haven't had the training. If they already knew how to fight, became unstoppable. Then the others were the people with their raging emotions that they couldn't even win a fight if they tried, even if they had professional training beforehand. Then there were the people with no emotions. These people put mercy and humanity behind them as they fought. When no emotions were in play, they didn't fear death and didn't feel pain. The perfect killing machine. That's why I'm worried about Ava. She's been pushing her emotions to the side so much while she's been fighting. Then with her past and recent events, her emotions are either extreme or she doesn't pay attention to them, making her a cold-hearted killer. She's been through so much and has such great power and abilities, it's scary to think what she might do if she lost all her emotions and became a true monster. I would like to help her and assist with what she needs help with. But she's so distant yet upfront at the same time, it's impossible to see if you're making an effect on her or if she's just waiting for you to walk away so she can further shove her emotions away. I'm scared for her. Beta, a distant voice asked me, and I turned around to see Carl looking at me worriedly. Glancing behind him, I saw a good percentage of the pack who I believe must have been the only ones who survived the battle disheveled. Bleeding, bruised and beat up, but ultimately alive still. I smiled softly. Is this everyone? I asked Kyle quietly. He looked up at me, his left eye bruised and lip busted as he nodded his head quietly. I was surprised to see such a large amount alive, and I was glad to see that. Glancing along the long line of people, which I estimated to be about 100 to 200 people, I caught sight of little Jenny, looking worse than most but alive nonetheless. Her hair was all over the place with spots of blood matting it together. Her eyes were droopy, one bloodshot, which means someone must have punched it. Finally, she was covered in cuts and bruises, her whole look a lot different to what she looked like before we came. Altogether, it looks like Jenny had ultimately been thrown off a cliff and attacked by lions. She noticed me staring at her and slowly wobbled to stand in front of me, and Kaya, her eyes slightly watering. Have you seen Ava? I can't find her and I can barely sense her. That got me even more worried than before. I felt her pain and it was extreme. She has to be in trouble. Okay. Scratch what I said before, I'm extremely super worried now. Jenny was Ava's protector as Ava was hers. If Jenny could barely sense Ava, that must mean something was either seriously wrong or Ava was very, very far away. Both reasons very bad. I glanced back at the very long line. At least 25% of the pack was still in working order, and the other 75% looked like they couldn't walk 3 steps without collapsing into the dirt and getting a face full of mud. Looking down at Jenny, I could see the small tears begins to cascade down her cheeks. Something has to be extremely wrong if Jenny is in tears. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Noble, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. Whoever can still walk around, we are doing a search for your alpha. Ivy is missing. Leave no stone unturned. I screamed out. Nearly everyone went rigid, their wolves probably taking control since their alpha is missing. It's in a pack wolf's nature to protect their alpha, anyone in their pack. Immediately people's wolves will take control when they know either a packmate. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Noble, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. Berta, Delta or anyone else in the pack is in danger and will try to protect them to the best of their abilities. Soon everyone who was still in working condition, or even some people who were wounded but could walk without collapsing, went on the search. Jenny immediately tried to sprint off, but I held her back, holding her shoulders and pulling her small frame to my chest. Let me go. She screeched, her tone slightly higher, and a snarl at the end of her words telling me her wolf was probably taking over. Looking over at Kyle, he looked okay but still not good enough to help search. He was even rocking side to side as he stood still. Watch her, I told him, and he quietly nodded as he took Jenny's hand. Whispering something soft into her ear so I couldn't hear, then they quietly walked away. I was pretty beaten up, I wasn't gonna lie, my arm was broken, I was covered in cuts and bruises, but other than that I was okay to help search. I knew. Granted, if Ava was still on this territory, where she must be. I knew a lot about this Aiden guy. She told me countless things about him, but she never told me where he might be hiding on this territory. What I did know, that he was a coward and spent a lot of his time pleasuring and defending himself. Where a better place to protect yourself than in your own home? So I set off that way first. Ava told me his house was close enough to the pack house that it was only a quick walk, but far enough that people wouldn't hear her screams. It was chilling the way she told me, so emotional as lie, and it sent a new wave of worry over me. She was already so unstable. I hope she's okay. I remember the way she described the house. It's surrounded by trees, but it's not thick enough to be called a forest, but not clear enough to be called plains. It's his favorite color, dark crimson. His roof blends in with the color of the night sky. The fountain outside is an angel. It was handmade to make it seem like it was screaming at the sky, spraying water like a sprinkler would. I stepped outside the front of the pack house. The walls were con grey, the roof is stunning black. It looked so homey, yet the way Ava described what happened inside these walls made me sick to my stomach. In times of war, all the elderly. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Noble, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. Teens that were young or couldn't fight and pregnant women would hide in a safe house that's usually under the pack house or under their own homes. It was mainly since rogues would first go after the pack wolves who couldn't fight, so they can be used as a bargaining price to get the pack to forfeit everything they owned to save them. Even if the alpha then was cruel and insane. Without his pack mates he couldn't have a pack, and everyone would leave the pack if he didn't try to get back all the warriors he depends on, mates and children. Looking around the front of the pack house for any clues, I caught sight of a track that looked worn down by years of use. That little pathway of dirt with little bits of grass trying to grow before it got trampled again. I immediately began jogging towards the path as I cradled my wrist, making sure it didn't hurt, as slowly jogged along. The pathway was quite beautiful, little outdoor lights lighting the path which weren't turned on at the moment as the early morning sun was showing. The trees slightly blew from the storm that has slowly passed. I signed as I continued to run across the path. Soon enough the house came into view exactly the way A had described it. I first saw the angel statue that looks as if it was screaming. The house was crimson red. The roof was a very dark blue, and it was surrounded by a small amount of trees. I quickly ran for the house, making sure not to hurt my wrist on the way in. Quickly barging through the door that was left open, I listened for any heartbeats nearby. There was only one. I could hear my heartbeat as it pumped rapidly, the adrenaline from the fight not completely faded. Then there was a very faint heartbeat located upstairs with a beautiful smell accompanying it. The smell was intoxicating, and I grew rigid as I remember what happened the first time I followed that scent. Even though my mind was hysterics from this smell, my legs moved on their own accord as they proceeded to run quickly up the stairs. This house was only 2 stories, so when I reached the next story there was only 1 door on this whole level. Slowly I grabbed the handle of the oak door and pushed the door softly open, staying rigid all the while. The room was filled with dark mahogany furniture, with the walls a thick red. It's so weird how anyone could have a room the color of blood. But what caught my sight instantly was the unconscious girl laying on the bed. It wasn't Ava, I knew that for sure, but instantly when my eyes landed on her I knew who she was. She was my second chance mate. She was beaten and bruised. The only thing covering her body was a red silk nightgown. Quickly I ran over to her, glancing over her unconscious body as she lay quietly and peacefully. Her cheeks were stained with tears and her eye was black. My wolf whimpered inside me. Grabbing her quickly, I wrapped my arms softly around her, ignoring the pain that flared in my wrist as I grabbed her. My wolf needed this, and I didn't want to leave her. Her hair was a fiery red with light freckles littering her cheeks, making her look so innocent. Soon after I held her, her eyes fluttered open, softly showing me the intense green color that swam in her eyes. She was gorgeous, but I could tell she was malnourished and had been beaten so much that it must hurt to move. "Hey," I whispered softly to her. Her eyes relaxed and immediately tears began to fill them. "Hi," she responded, a smile at the end of her words. "What's your name?" I asked softly, my eyes never leaving hers. "Christina." "I'm Nathan." She looked at me with so much love and adoration I thought I was gonna melt, and I was glad I could have a second chance mate that loved me better than my first. Suddenly her eyes grew wide. "You need to get out," she told me as she began squirming in my hold, making me wince as she placed more pressure on my wrist. "Is not leaving you," I told her firmly. Christiana's eyes filled with tears. "Aiden's gonna come back. He'll kill you," she whispered, yelled as she continued to push me away. "Aiden's dead, and from a rogue pack. Our leader sought vengeance against Aiden, and his bond with the pack broke." She suddenly stopped, her scrambling, her movements freezing. "Dead?" she whispered, her eyes looking into mine once more as she looked for reassurance. "He's dead," I told her, finally brushing back some of her matted hair. She smiled up at me and hugged me hard. It made me absolutely melt the way the sparks began everywhere she touched me. At the same time, I was finding it very difficult to not grab and knock her right then and there, since her nightgown kept riding up and she was pushed flush against me. Thinking of an excuse to ask her kindly to stop touching me, even though I wanted her to keep touching me, I remembered why I even came here in the first place. "I'm searching for my leader at the moment. Do you want to stay here, or I can leave you with some of O?" "I want to stay with you," she told me finally. I was honestly trying to avoid that. Like, what would happen if, since she came with me, Ava was in danger, which would ultimately lead me and Christiana into danger as well. I couldn't protect her and Ava at the same time. I would love to, but to bring you along would mean that if Ava is in fact in danger, it could ultimately put you in danger. I would hate myself if I lost you, I whispered to her, pushing back her hair all the while. Christiana looked down and felt her tears continuing to fall as she thought over my words. "Fine," she whispered quietly as she looked up at me through her tear-filled lashes and stained cheeks. "I'll stay with someone," she whispered, and I already knew the right person. "Let's go," I told her. "You can walk, right?" I asked quietly through the mind link barley. "What do you need?" They responded quietly back. "I found my second chance mate. I'm gonna continue searching for Ava, but you can keep an eye on her." I could see through the mind link the scowl on their face. "I'll meet you in front of the Moonrise Pack house," I responded back, all but to Shirpily, and they shut the mind link off. Returning the attention back to my mate, I began running out of the house with my mate safely cradled in my arms. She bounced and wobbled, but all the while continued to push herself closer to me as she savored the sparks and feeling warmth I must have been giving off. It was natural for a werewolf to produce high amounts of body heat, but Christina was colder than most werewolves. It was like she was human. Soon enough I reached the front of the pack house once again, and there stood my second favorite girl after my mate. "Sapphire," I yelled loudly as she continued to ignore me, something obviously catching her interest. Soon enough she realized my presence, and I noticed in her hands was a little dandelion of the petals picked off. Sapphire was one of the first people I met in that place, and I'm so glad that she was there. In her old pack she was made fun of her unnatural hair and usual happy outlook on life. She was lucky to still have all that childlike wonder, even if she had already been tainted by the world's cruelness. "Nathan," she exclaimed, a bright smile on her face as she began spitting flower petals from her mouth and drubbing her tongue. After she stood up straight, as if nothing had happened, I gave her an ode, and Christiana was quietly laughing to herself. "To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nilben, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. This is Sapphire. Sapphire, this is Christiana." I looked down at the gorgeous beauty in my arms afterwards as Christiana continued to stare forward at the curious Sapphire that stared at her like a piece of meat. "Why is she staring at me like that?" Christiana asked low enough that only I would hear. "She's a curious, a very observant perbater. A warrior told me through the link." What scared me was the shakiness of his voice. "Yet," I asked back, quote suspiciously, "Ava is in the pack house. On the top floor," he replied shakily, his voice breaking in the middle of his words as he spoke. "They found Ava." I told Sapphire, and immediately this carefree meeting had turned serious, and I could see the question in Christiana's eyes, but before she asked I had already placed her gently on the ground before I began sprinting full pace into the house. I ran quickly up the steps of the pack house, barely taking in the decoration style of the home. I instantly became tense the minute I stepped onto the third floor. The smell of Ava's and other person's blood was mixed so thickly in the air it was disgusting. Soon enough my feet walked on their own according to the Alpha's quarters of the top floor. When I pushed open the door softly, the smell grew more intense, and I could see the stain of the blood on the floor before it into another room. I gulped. With cautious steps I walked to this room, and the first thing I saw was the warrior laying on the ground. The sound of his hurling and gurgling noise as he threw up the contents of his stomach in one pile on the floor. Walking into the room I could see what he was hurling about. The first thing you see when you enter this room was that somehow, or whoever this was, they used to be a person. Their body had been penetrated by thick crystals as chunks, and meaty pieces of his body had either been thrown or were dangling off the loose pieces of crystal. The clothes they wore once before were ripped and shredded beyond recognition, and it looked disgusting. "That's Ava?" I asked quietly to the warrior, gazing down at his shivering form. He shook his head slowly and raised his shaky hand as he kept his face pointed to the floor, to something on the other side of the crystal massacre. Walking around quietly, making sure to avoid any splotches of blood or pieces of what used to be of that human as I made my way around the remains of this man. Looking up finally, I wished I never looked up in the first place. Tears filled my eyes as I looked at the body of my leader. Ava thump, thump, thump. Chapter 31. Wake Up Unknown POV. I could feel the pain she felt even if we had been apart so long. It was dumb of me to find another person to love, and I couldn't imagine what pain I had put Ava through at the time. It was a drunken mistake that I wish I could take back. I felt guilty and horrible. Whatever made her feel that amount of pain must mean she's extremely close to death or is being tortured. But with her vampire and werewolf abilities combined, I hoped she would be fine before I find her. I feel the pain she felt, and it felt as if a fire had been set off in the middle of my stomach. I eventually collapsed and fainted from the pain, as unprofessional as it was. I was further to did that nothing was wrong, and it most likely had something to do with the bond I share with Ava. Soon after, I had left the pack under the watchful eye of my beta and left the pack house to go and search for my girl. Her heartbeat was faintly replaying in my mind as if she hanged by a thread. I could even hear the sounds around her and feel the feeling of a comfortable space. But I could never see. But Ava better watch out, because I'm coming. Full speed ahead. Jenny POV. I continued to hold on to other Ava's hand as I sobbed into the shitty hospital bed. Oh whoops, I used a bad word, didn't I? Let me rephrase that. I continued to hold on to Ava's hand as I sobbed into the crappy hospital bed. Yeah, it sucks being 14. Soon after the war, since we had taken over the pack, lots of the warriors and pack members remembered Ava and practically worshipped her since she killed the brutal Alpha. Their pack were amazing fighters since Aiden and their Alpha had trained them mercilessly and body without break. That's why they lost, because they barely had any time to even sleep and eat, since nearly all their money was spent on training and lab equipment. It was insane what their laboratory was filled with. It was unbelievable. They told everything they were working on since Nathan asked, and he was their new beta. Our Gamma and the Gamma are meant to fight for the position soon, but at the moment it's kinda cool how we have to Gamma S. But the new entire combined pack is now called Moon's Blood. It's meant, though, that it represents their old pack and the blood that was shed while becoming one whole pack, which is quite nice. Still, this pack is finding it hard to adjust since Ava hasn't woken up yet and hasn't even showed any signs of waking up at all. Once again, the nurse walked in. Sapphire, her name was. She knew why I didn't want to talk in the first couple of days. She tried to make me speak, but unless Ava was here with me, I felt no point in moving. Although I had that special bond. I'm not gonna say something cheesy like, even if we didn't share the bond, we would still be extremely close. But even before I realized that the bond was there, Ava was still kind to me. She got my leg back into place when I didn't know how. She would have done it for anyone, but I'm still glad she was kind enough to deal with a screaming little girl. But once we both did realize the bond was there, I'm so glad she didn't leave me like most people did. On that note, my dumb brother and his mate. We have gotten closer and things have been going better. But I'll still never be able to trust him like I have placed trust in Ava. He abandoned me the first chance he got, and his selfish has made it so I was put in a dangerous war and forced to fight battles I never thought I would fight. The only reason I actually trying to be nice to that idiot is because Ava Lisby told me to be nice to him and give him a chance. I hold some resentment to her, and I hate myself for it. I still remember when I yelled at her. It was for a good reason. She wanted to end her suffering. And she had a lot of suffering. If she needed to end it, by doing that I would try to stop her. But if I can't, I'll lead her to the beach and tell her goodbye so she can finally be happy. While in my thoughts I didn't realize that Sapphire was mumbling things to herself. But still soft enough for me to hear, and what she said made me sob more into the crappy hospital bed. I hope you can pull yourself out of this bind, because it doesn't seem like you're gonna be able to do very soon. She soon left, not even sparing me a glance as she left the room, silent tears streaming down her face as well. I held Ava's hand tighter than before as I let out all my bottled up emotions. You shouldn't go, I yelled, holding her hand tighter with both of mine. I squished my eyes together, tighter than before, hoping that I could stop the tears. I didn't get to say goodbye. I fell face first onto the bed as I stayed seated on the chair, gripping her hand so tight I think I was making it lose circulation. I soon felt a hand on my shoulder and immediately looked into the eyes of my older brother, his mate standing behind him. It's not fair, he told me softly as he patted my shoulder awkwardly, not into pretending to like him or his mate, who I loathed the sight of standing behind me. I shook his hand off my shoulder so it fell back to his side. Go away, I told him softly, not even looking at him as I ran my thumb along Ava's hand in a soothing manner, successfully rubbing all my tears from her perfect skin. That's no way to speak to your brother, Jake told me firmly, Matilda behind him doing a slight gasp. I don't have a brother. He vanished and never came back. I whispered softly, looking down into my lap so the hair fell over my face, my thumb tracing patterns on Ava's hand. Jenny, what do you say? I'm saying you're no brother to me. So stop trying. Successfully standing up and turning so the chair I was sitting in was pushed back, narrowly missing Matilda as I glared daggers at Jack. I'm your brother, and you will respect me. You don't get to treat me like dirt. Jack screamed, equally as ferocious. I growled lowly. You have no right to be my brother. I would rather have you dead than alive. The only reason I ever talked to you was Ava. And right now my protector is laying half dead in a shitty hospital bed. So I'm just letting you know that you're a piece of shit, and I hope you never talk to me again. Leave. Halfway through my words, my eyes beginning to water again as I repeatedly gesture around the shitty hospital room. I did even bother to see if he processed my words. I brought the chair back to its original spot, sat down and began tracing patterns in Ava's hand again with my thumb. Jack was breathing heavily behind me, obviously mad. Matilda's began whispering things to his ear before I heard them walk out and leave, Jack making sure to slam the door on his way out. Then I continued my routine of sobbing into Ava's stone-cold hand. Chapter the Tito you have to fight. Of a POV what? I was so cold. I felt like I was shaking an earthquake or something. This coldness and darkness of this place made me feel safe. I sat circled up in a ball. In forest position. My small yet strong body was shaking violently. With the knees or the coldness around me, I will not know. But I did know they felt as if I was being watched. My tail shook with the knees and my ears swiveled around the top of my head checking for dangers. She was here. How'd you know? Seconds after I thought that I heard her metallic voice. It sent shivers down my spine as I listened and looked around me searching for where she might be. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeline Nilben. Heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. She told me, her voice so close it made me jump. I turned around me to my right to see her sitting there, a light chuckle making her form shake as she laughed at how shocked I was to see her. Surprise, she told me, moving her hands in a sort of waving motion beside her to emphasize the weirdness and surprise of the situation. I stood up in surprise, looking around me as I made sure I was in this place. The stars twinkled softly and I stood on an invisible platform, the stars underneath me still shining as bright as the ones higher up. What am I doing here? I asked breathlessly, the shock making it hard to speak. You're dead, she told me finally, a hint of sadness in her voice. I was confused at first, but as cliché as it was, my memories came back to me. The pain and scenes all replayed in my mind, forcing me to hold my head softly, in an effort to stop the repeated banging inside my skull. My ears were forced back, no longer sensing the danger, and my tail went black behind me. I remember murdering my father. I remember murdering my adoptive siblings. I remember murdering my mother. Then I killed Aiden. He was gone. I turned to see the moon goddess hunched over, watching something over the invisible platform. Looking down, I could see a screen of some sorts. We're playing a movie. This movie or show consisted of so much screaming it bounced off this plane in repeated motions, so it seemed the screaming came from all around me. I slowly walked to where the moon goddess sat, sitting softly next to her, staring the screen. It brought tears to my eyes. Hundreds of different pack members stood around my cold and bloody body. I had been taken off the crystal and taken outside the pack house. By none other than Nathan. I could see the blood all around his body and I felt the tears fall. What made me smile, though, was a young girl that came forward and began to comfort him. He was crying, but when he looked at her, he looked the slightest bit happier, and it made me smile softly to know that Nathan found a mate he deserves. Looking to the other side of my body, it made me have to hold my mouth to stop the soft sob that was about to escape. Jenny was crouched over my body, her face on my chest. She didn't care that she was getting all my blood over her. She was sobbing loudly, her hands wrapping around my arm as she practically lay on top of my body. I leaned down trying to reach her, but I couldn't reach her. The moon goddess had reached her long and pale arm around my waist and held me back. Let me go. She needs me. I screeched, trying desperately to rip the moon goddess's arm off from around my waist. I tried my hardest to wiggle my way from her grasp, but I was too weak. The only thing you'll find if I let you go is a pit of nothingness, where you shall fall for eternity, she told me calmly. I cried harder and threw myself at the moon goddess, gripping her dress into my fists as she slowly ran her hand down the length of my back. Let me see, Jenny. I yelled again, hugging her tighter to me than before. Your body isn't healing. Your heart wasn't affected, but your body isn't healing like it should. I believe those crystals of yours knew that you wanted to be gone, counseling out your healing. She gazed down at my body. The scene of Jenny and Nath, I'm crying next to my body, leaving a scar in mind. Right now, the part of you that is here talking to me is the part that yet hasn't snapped. I gazed at her curiously, my hair still dripping with tears. You're the part of Ava's mind that still wants to live. But since so much of your body has given up on living, you are right now around 10 of your mind that does want to live. The rest is given up, but you can gain them back, make them think differently. I looked back up the moon goddess's face, her hair covering it as usual. I'll do anything, I told her softly, my fists loosening in her dress. Good. A happiness in her tone was unmistakable, and it made me smile softly up at her. Even though I couldn't see her eyes, I hoped they twinkled and shone with pride. What you need to do? She stopped her words, her voice drifting softly off as if she was trying to remember something. Fight. You have done it all your life. Now it is time to be the hero that saves the day and returns back to her family. I beamed a smile, but one thought stuck with my mind. Moon goddess. Yes, Ava. Aemon talked to me as I was dying. Who was he? As soon as I finished the sentence, her body began to disappear into the darkness, the parts of her body turning into stardust as it drifted away from me in a large mass. He's coming. She told me, all emotion lost from her voice. Chapter 33. He came back. Nathan POV week later. It's been getting harder without Ava around. She just had this calming aura that I can't seem to mimic. It had been difficult for this whole entire pack. I can say that for free. Since this pack has only recently been a pack joined from a rogue pack and an evil pack. Civil fights and wars break out constantly. Since the making of this pack, we've had around 5 civil fights and 2 civil wars. And counting. I roll my eyes as I slam my head onto the desk that has papers piled to the brim on top. I have to send so many letters and emails and sign so many things, I just want to punch myself. After taking over the Moonrise pack and its people, we also accidentally took over its many business that littered the state. And to get all its human employees to believe that I was Aiden's long-lost son was harder to do than planned. Some of the workers wanted blood tests, and I can't do those unless I wanted to be found out. We can't tell them the truth because then we will be the center of attention and would be hunted down by the supernatural society, and we can't pretend there's anyone close because nobody would have ever even heard of me. So this is giving me more of a headache than the pack link. So someone is at the border. He requests he sees Ava. I bounded out of my seat the minute he said Ava. Which border? I asked back quickly with a hint of anger. South. He looks really bad. But he's definitely an alpha. It's leaping off him like waves. Make sure he doesn't move. I shut down the pack link and ran out the office and down through the winding halls. We had taken down all the paintings and burned the furniture to start fresh. At the moment, the only things located in halls are countless plastic mats with the 1 or 2 paintbrushes and paint cans here and there. We were changing the color to a very light brown to give it a sort of rustic outdoor look. And we wanted to change the structure of the house so it was nothing like the way it was before. I ran quickly out the front door, shoving the oak door to the side, almost knocking my beautiful mate over as she stood there kinda shocked. Instantly guilt swarmed me. Are you okay? Are you hurt? I asked, rushed as I pulled the tiny girl into my arms, my hand lightly brushing her head as she tried shoving away my forceful arms. If J.S. Genie come, she tried to yell, her voice a lot more quiet and jumbled since she was pressed further into my chest. I pulled away, but still kept her in my arms as I looked down at her innocent green eyes. What was that? I asked softly, squishing her cheeks like a child before she swatted them away with a mighty glare. Let go of me, she yelped, the sparks obviously having an effect on her. I chuckled lightly and kissed her forehead. Her response was a blush that was a deeper shade of red. I have to go. You need to stay safe. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Noble. Heartfelt thanks for your unfading patience, enthusiasm. Instantly she grew rigid. Is someone here to hurt us? She asked, her eyes twinkling with new tears forming as her nose began to twitch, showing me that she's afraid of something. That's what I'm going to find out. Grab a packmate or something if you are afraid, but don't worry, it's only one rogue. They just want to talk and the patrols are there. So you can calm down, okay? I kissed her forehead again. I won't be long, love. I stumbled past her, waving all the while as she sat at the front porch, a hand on top of her lips as she tried to contain her laughter, her other hand waving all the while. Then turning, I ran into the forest. My wolf began seeking control soon enough, to which I granted him access after I'd taken off my clothes and tied my jeans to my ankle. He made my bones and flesh move and turn to the way he wishes, while I slowly let myself go into the back of my mind. My wolf shook out his long dark blue fur, his tongue lolling out the side as he smiled crookedly as he enjoyed being let out. I enjoyed the sight. With my wolf out, everything was so much clearer and brighter. I was smiling in the back of my wolf's mind, the forest echoing around us. Let's get moving, buddy, I told him firmly. His tongue rolled back into his mouth, his ears setting into position as he set off in a powerful sprint. I watched as he scanned the terrain he ran over. It was a beautiful day. The sun was just beginning to make its descent to the horizon, showing that it's early noon. The trees shimmered and rustled as a wind tore through its higher leaves. The sun dancing across the ground as my wolf's ball thudded across the ground in a rhythmic motion. It's one of the most exhilarating feelings running in wolf form. An even better feeling when it's your own soul taking the reins. But my wolf deserved to be in control every once in a while, and we both know that I need to take back the reins from him more often than not. Most wolves that people have aren't given a name, and most of the time they can't communicate well with each other unless they are nodding or doing facial expressions. But most of the time, since both wolf and human live in the same body, they can sense what the other person is thinking and communicate that way. It's extremely rare when two people can't communicate to their wolves in general. Like Ava. But I'm pretty much guessing she doesn't know as much about it as any of us do. It's never often you find a hybrid in the supernatural society. The weirder thing is that whenever there is a recorded case of a hybrid, all of them are female. It's something that every supernatural species and being doesn't understand. It may be because of genes, or maybe it's because of the hormones, but this is the one thing nobody knows the cause of. Many people have tried to create a male hybrid, but every attempt either ended in failure or death. My thoughts were put on pause as the sound of shouting and growls signaled in the distance. My wolf instantly gave me control, knowing I was the person meant to handle this situation. After coming to a halt, I slowly shifted back to my human form and pulled the clothes onto my body. I began to do a slow jog closer to the shouting that penetrated my ears and made my eardrums ring. The trees cleared slightly, but not enough to be a plain. The trees around the tiny grass field shook with what seemed to be fright as the border patrol and the strange man continued to have a yelling match. "Shut the fuck up, everyone." I screamed so loud everything just seemed to stop. The border control seemed to cower away, one with brown hair, one with the dark brown, and the wolf laid on the ground, its brown and black spotted coat shimmering in the late afternoon sun. Next I turned to a roughed-up man who only wore a pair of ripped-up washed dark blue jeans. His oily brown hair with a hint of blonde and his brown eyes seemed so dull and dead. I didn't want to even look at them. Those eyes held so much pain and guilt it made me sick to the stomach. What I also did notice was the way his alpha power lapped off him in waves. Confirming my thoughts. He was Ava's mate. I lifted my finger to the man, my eyes piercing his brown, curious ones. "What do you want?" I asked him, my eyes burning with rage as I spoke. "I'm here for Ava." I felt her pain. He got straight to the point, his eyes burning into mine as he held a mighty glare that tried to combat my own. His hands gesturing towards our pack rounds. "You're the one that caused her the most pain. What with fucking that bitch and all." Ava felt all of that. I told him, my glare never faltering as we continue our stare down. He runs his hand through his hair, obviously frustrated with the situation. It was a drunken mistake. I've been in such a deep depression ever since she left that all I do is drink. I growled out, angry with everything that's happening. "Even if you wanted to see her, you can't. She's in a coma and hasn't shown any signs of improvement." I pleaded with the man, hoping that he would take the message and go. The only people that are allowed in her room are her protector, the nurses, doctors, and I. No one else is even allowed close. I yelled. His whole body seemed to go weak the minute I told him that Ava was in a coma. His eyes swelled with tears that you could see he didn't want to let fall. "You're lying." His mind and wolf probably in denial that their mate is in a coma. "Am I lying?" "To my agent extraordinaire, Myelin Nilben. Heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm." I scoffed at the end of his words, rolling my eyes, and I kept telling myself how stupid this guy must be. "Hey guys, am I lying?" I yelled to the guards. They all shook their heads no. He broke down into tears, which honestly shocked me, as did all the other guards. Everyone didn't know what to do. A full-grown alpha has had a complete and utter breakdown in front of a beta of a close by peck and countless guards. Alphas are meant to be pride-filled and arrogant leaders, focusing most of the time on power more than kindness. It's funny watching this scene unravel. If the rejection had worked, I wouldn't have felt her pain. Right. the Alpha asked from the ground, his stance open, unshaking. That was a fair point. Usually after a mate rejects their mate the bond is broken, and there are no ties between the two. It's curious actually. Ava told me that she told Dash to shove the rejection up his ass or something along those lines, which meant she accepted it. So it must mean the bond is still intact. I growled softly to myself. Knowing full and well a mate's presence can help the healing process. You're allowed into the territory and you have access to Ava. Instantly as the words left my mouth, Ash was on his feet, his body ready to sprint. But her protector is in there as well. Under any circumstances that you annoy that little girl in any way, I will have you kicked off this territory immediately. Understood. He nodded his head up and down so fast it was actually impressive. Then he went into a full sprint, leaving the guards and I all baffled at what had just happened. Then Dave spoke up. Mates, what are you gonna do? Chapter 30 for Strange Man, any POV 1 week. 7 days. 168 hours. 10,080 minutes. 604,800 seconds. And others still hasn't woken up. Constantly people walk in and out of this building requesting that I eat or drink something. But all I feel is numb. I can't deny i.e. that my body must be hungry, since nearly every second I can hear some sort of rumble and gurgle from my stomach. Today was meant to mark a week since the war. Some people are throwing small parties and things, but no one is really in happy mood. I sighed once more, gazing down at Eva's still body. She doesn't look any better and seems to be getting paler every day. I held her hand tightly in between mine, praying that the protection bond might do something. Anything. But it only leads to my hands getting tired and Eva's hand going more pale from lack of blood flow. We hadn't forgotten that Eva was half vampire. We had a blood drip that put 1 bag of blood into her body every day. Sometimes it was my blood, other times it may be Nathan's or pack members that offered to give up some of their blood. It sat on the left side of her bed while I sat on the right in my uncomfortable chair. There's someone coming in to see Eva. You're allowed to stay. Nathan, mind linked me. I sent a picture back of me nodding. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeline Nilben. Heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. I just continued to stroke Ava's hand like nothing happened. Like Nathan said, the door did swing open, and I did take a glance at the strange man that walked in. He was disheveled and breathing heavily as if he had sprinted his way here. He was tall and muscular, spilling with energy, which I knew meant he was an alpha. He had ruffled blonde, brown hair that made him seem kinda crazy. Then he just had simple brown eyes. His body was lean and strong, his tense muscles showing through his t-shirt. I sized him up, openly checking to see if Ava had any change even though the strange man came in. She was motionless as always. I stroked her hand again and again as the man took a seat and sat opposite me. He reached out for one of Ava's hands and I grew tense. But even though this man was new and I didn't know him, my body let him hold her hand. My wolf was calm as he began stroking her hand, his eyes holding sympathy for Ava. I laid my head on the bed, Ava's hand in front of me as my begun fingers playing with hers. How long has she been like this? A week, I whispered back, my voice still hoarse. I could feel and hear as his body further tensed at what I had said. It made me curious. I sat back up, looking straight into the man's eye. He seemed wary as I looked at him, but I didn't care what he thought. I began sizing him up quietly, taking in small details like his forehead had indented lines into it, as if he has had a lot of stress lately. He had large black under eyes, showing how tired he was, and his lip had a scar from maybe a previous battle with an opponent. With a finally disapproving stare, I began looking at Ava. Can I ask you something? His voice was smooth, but still had that hint of breathlessness in it. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeline Nilben. Heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. I snapped back harshly. When Ava first killed the rogue alpha and she escaped with you guys, what happened since then? Please, I need to know. I gave a slight glare off to the man, his tense demeanor slowly relaxing. She came to us after the battle and met us in the clearing. I was glad we had a few moments rest, since beforehand I had broken my leg in BA. You fought? He asked, his voice holding shock. I nodded my head quietly. We left soon after she spoke a few words, requesting that we try and make it back to our hideout so we can rest and replenish our supplies. She also talked about how since she has a pack that she will attack her old pack and kill her alpha. I sniffled slightly and continued with the story. We began running and she managed to keep up with all of us even in wolf form. I began to smile. She looked so happy in that moment. I knew that she was my protector and I hers as soon as I saw her. But I could also tell that she may not have understood, so I kept my distance, trying to keep up with the pack while running with a broken leg. She told us all to soon stop and I immediately fell to my side hoping the healing effect would take effect. I smiled softly. Ava walked over to me and told me to shift. She put my leg back into place and let me sleep on her lap. Since our pack hadn't slept for over 48 hours, Ava ordered the pack to sleep for the night while she watched over us. We left in the morning and found a bunch of dying wolves. My smile vanished. They had been attacked by someone or something. We tried to save them, but they all died. Ava was really upset with herself for not saving them, and she ended up taking down a full-grown tree with a single kick. My face set into an emotional line. She took down a full-grown tree. The man asked, slight perplexed. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nilben, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. She's part vampire, as everyone knows. I smiled down at Eva's scarred face. Her lips a light purple as her cheeks were no longer the usual rosy red. What else happened? The man asked again after a moment of silence, his eyes boring into mine as they searched for answers. Soon after that day of finding the Hatrogues, Ava was lazying about on a nice day. Then suddenly Nathan told us she had like a panic attack sort of thing. She kept screaming in agony as if she was being torn to bits from the inside out. The tears pooled in my eyes as rage filled my body. The man went rigid, his whole body and frame going tense, his muscles showing through his shirt as he seemed to look everywhere but me. Ignoring him, I continued. After that she just seemed to change. It was like a piece of her was lost and her sole purpose was to gain revenge and watch over me. I smiled at that. Ava was only checking to see if I was okay and me her. She kept me balanced while I kept her in check. We sized each other out. So, after that she ended up getting revenge and re-attacked her old pack, which we are staying at the moment. What we did find out was the fact that she got her vampire ability and used it to try and kill herself at the end of the battle with Aiden. I softly sobbed as I leaned my head back next to Ava, not wanting that idiot to see me cry. So, is she going to be okay? The guy mumbles to me, his voice quiet and monotone. I don't know. I whispered, my hand gripping Ava's with more force as tears cascading down my face. Chapter 35. Trial 1. Vampire side. She just left me. Why would she leave me? I'm not even sure what to do. I growled out, my ears flattening back as I looked in the direction of where she went and disintegrated in front of me, leaving me alone with no idea what I meant to do. Where are you? I screamed into the open air. The only response that came was the softest breeze that was virtually undetectable blowing my way, surrounding me in cold air before leaving me to stand alone. I spun around quickly to see a sight that made me want to empty my stomach. But I didn't think it was possible in this realm. In looks I didn't see the problem, but the energy this thing projected me made me sick. It was just this large black mass. Whispers and the stench of 1,000 dead bodies emitted from the center of this abomination. My ears pulled back instinctively and my tail tucked itself safely in between my legs. My vampire side, on the other hand, craved for this energy, whispering, "Enter." I gulped rather loudly, the sound seeming to echo around the emptiness of the space around me. "Enter, Ava." Her voice whispered to me once again. Putting on a brave face and forcing my ears to search for dangers around me, I entered the mass, the dark blackness seeming to enter every opening in my body as I drew closer to the center of this place. Whispers came from all around me, some that seemed to come from my own mind or behind me. Either way, they were there and only whispered bloodthirsty. Walking through the black mass, my enhanced sight let me see the tiniest of particles flying around me, the particles seeming like ash falling from a fire. I turned around, looking behind me from where I came from. I couldn't even see the stars anymore. I gulped louder and continued to walk further into the darkness, my wolf side of me getting more uneasy at every second and my vampire side relishing in this feeling. Honestly, if I had to choose a species between a werewolf and vampire, I would want to be a wolf. Stop! A creature yelled, its voice coming out in a sort of static wave as I stopped on the spot. Go no further. Your body will turn into a lifeless wreck, the creature said, once again a sort of snark at the end of its words as I listened intently. Listening to the creature's warnings, I slowly turned around. Don't let her fool you. Fight her to the death, her voice told me softly, her tone like that of an angel's. Listening to the mood goddess's instructions, I turned back around, growling into the air, hoping to intimidate whatever enemy may be lurking in the shadows. In return, I got a hearty chuckle. So be it. Instantly the black mass was lifted, but instead of being in the moon goddess's realm, I stood in the middle of a burning forest, the trees and animals burning, as the sound of screams reached my ears. Instantly my heart bumped faster and my breaths came out quicker. I searched around me, searching for what or who would have done this cruel act against nature. After a full 360-degree spin every direction possible, I found what I thought was the cause. A girl stood in the middle of the field. She wore a black dress that reached body mid-thigh and looked like something a hooker would wear. She faced away from me, her black hair blowing in the breeze as she seemed enthralled with watching the forest around her burn to the ground. As if knowing what I was thinking, she spoke to me. Isn't it crazy how someone could find enjoyment from destroying the lives of others? Her voice was soft. I knew that voice. What the fuck are you doing? I yelled at the being, my eyes burning with fury. What all creatures born of hell want. She slowly turned towards me, her face becoming visible. For everyone to live a hell like us. Remind me to punch the moon goddess. I don't understand. I yelled to her. She chuckled again. I'm your vampire side. Apparently you're meant to fight me, and if you defeat me, you'll be allowed to control me better. She smiled, her hand sitting on her hip as she watched her other as if to check her nails. I growled out, "This is a dumb test." I told her, crossing my arms over my chest as I watched her. She giggled softly, staring at me again with bright red eyes that burned like the fire that surrounded us both. It's called a trial, dummy. So I'm meant to fight you? I asked softly as I pulled my ears back softly. She gave me a dumbfounded look, rolling her eyes as she watched me. No shit, Sherlock. I growled out, snapping my teeth in the direction of the monster that stood in front of me. Using all the power in my body, I launched myself forward at the vampire side of myself in front of me. She only seemed to chuckle as a crystal propelled itself through the earth and underneath, most likely leaving a nasty bruise as I launched into the air. Watch yourself while you land. The crystal stopped its ascent and launched me into the sky, my wolf side immediately cowering as it didn't enjoy being in the air. I growled again and used this as my chance to use the gravity of my fall to launch myself at the bitch who seemed to enthrall Ed with her nails to even notice me coming closer to her. What I didn't know is that this is what she planned, as she easily sidestepped me and left me to roll across the burning earth as mashed into the ground. I was dazed from my fall and felt weak. I don't get why I'm even trying anymore, and slowly I let myself relax a little. Get up. I ignored her. Get up. I ignored her again. Get up or Jenny will never forgive you. This time I didn't ignore her. I opened my eyes slowly to see the burning forest still around me, with yet another black mass in front of me, her eyes glistening a bright red. Your wolf side is more dominant. I'm actually a lot weaker than you, and still you lost. I can understand why our family abandoned us. I snapped. I screamed out and launched my leg in what I assumed were hers, forcing her to trip over and fall on the ground. I gripped her ankles in a tight force, throwing her into a nearby tree. The loud snap, crackle and pop of her bones filling me with glee. I strode over to her, my nostrils flaring as her body contained the rage that had overcome my body. As I stood in front of her, she sat with her back against the tree, her forehead bleeding with a streak of blood coming out of her mouth. She opened one eye and looked up at me, giving me a lopsided grin. "You win," she whispered. I stood still, not trusting anything that she said, as she slowly made herself stand up, her bones cracking with every movement as they protested against her getting up. She stood straight in front of me in perfect height and size, the only difference between us being that her eyes were bright red in the dress she wore. "The next trial is against your wolf side. She's gonna be hard to beat." But don't worry, you'll have my full support. Then in the grossest turn of events she connected her lips with mine. I tried shoving her away, but before she fully let go of me she bit down hard on my lip, forcing it to bleed. When she let go she gave me a lopsided grin, her body growing fainter at the second. To show you that you've won, I had to give you my blood and mix it with yours. I bled from my mouth, so I guess I wanted to surprise you, huh? She giggled softly, her hands giving off a small wave as she grew fainter. You have my full support. She's gone. I'm not gone, you fucking idiot. I'm a part of you, oh. Yo, you fucking idiot. God, I sometimes wish I was someone else's conscience, hey. I'm just saying the truth. Just go on straight ahead for your next round. You'll be fine. Turning around softly I did as my consciousness said, as I seemed to know exactly where I was going. My body naturally avoiding the crystals that still stood proud and tall in the center of the battlefield. Will I do that? Eventually. But other than that, how am I meant to defeat the werewolf side of me? You even said so yourself that you were the weaker one. She's a wolf. They depend on their senses. She's also annoying and I hope you beat her good. I rolled my eyes as I continued forward, the voice in my head, not wanting to go away anytime soon. So what about you actually take care of me this time around? I did take care of you. That's why I literally had to take over our body and get blood for us to live. Fucking retard, that was you. Well done. I don't think you're the type to crave blood that often. True. She's just up ahead. Open those doors. What do? Oh, you should listen to me more often. Just as the vampire side of me had said, there was a door hidden amongst the trees and brush of the burning forest. It seemed like every other door. A plain wooden brown oak door. I'll try to keep contact, but I would be annoying to listen to during battle. Thanks. No problem. Just fight. I want to see Jenny again. I didn't ask any more questions as I turned the knob and gave the door a high shove.